and do that. So give me just a second. This is why we do this early, because now it's causing problems. You just give me a minute. Yeah, I don't know what's going on here. Jamie, we may have to just upload. It keeps knocking me off the Go Live page.
Okay, we can do that.
Let me try one more way and see if it, try live. Let's see if that. Oh, this is, yeah, I'm not going to do that. That looks a little not normal. I'll try one more time, and if not, yeah, I don't know what it's doing. Let me go out of here. I'm going to try one more time. Says it's live streaming, Jamie, so I can't tell if it is because it didn't let me. It says it's preparing. So, all right, I'm
looking at my phone. I should see it pop up.
It just keeps saying live preparing. But it doesn't seem to be getting out of preparing. So I'm going to go ahead and admit all these people, and we're going to get started. Lots of people joining us, and if you are joining, I'd ask you to mute yourselves because we're all visible and able to talk this morning. So please put your phone, your video on mute if you don't mind. Good morning, everyone. It's good to see some familiar faces.
Morning.
Happy Tuesday. Happy Tuesday. We've got a couple more seconds and then we'll get going. Lots of people joining us, so. And if you're just coming in, just a reminder to put yourself on mute. All right. Well, it is my pleasure to welcome you all. I have 10 o'clock on the dot, so welcome to our continuation of our nonprofit master classes. This topic was, when we sent out the survey to all of our nonprofits in the region, this was the next most requested topic. And so we are here today to give you a deep dive into and donor relations during COVID. And I am so excited for our speakers today. They have been friends of ours in the business for a long time. And I'm going to go ahead and introduce both Andy and Kristen, and then we're going to start with Andy. Andy and Kristen are going to walk us through a PowerPoint, and we're going to have a chance to do some interactive Q&A about halfway through, and then at the end. So without further ado, let me share a little bit about Andy and Kristen. So Andy has more than 20 years of for-profit and nonprofit experience. He's a highly skilled, well-respected, and exceptionally diverse, versatile professional. He's an equity principal of Convergent Nonprofit Solutions, a national consultancy focused on developing sustainable funding strategies and raising capital for organizations. He has been personally responsible for thousands of investment requests and raised over $60 million for organizations that are positively impacting local, regional, national, and international communities. So we have good company here with us today. And then Kristen is Convergent's Director of Marketing. She started her career in marketing for nonprofits such as Susan G. Komen Foundation and USO. Her experience includes planning and strategy for both digital and offline platforms. She also facilitates information, best practices, and idea sharing among Convergent's numerous nonprofit clients across the nation through roundtables, webinars, and forum discussions. And as Jamie and I were talking about who would be really good to do this, she said, hands down, we've got to call Convergent. And they have been doing these since the beginning of COVID and long before that, just funding strategies, period. And we've been privileged to work with them over the years as well. So without further ado, I am going to turn it over to Andy and Kristen. So thank you, guys.
Thank you. Thanks for having us.
Thank you. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen so we can get started. All right, go right ahead, Andy.
All right, thanks, Kristen. Thanks, everybody, for joining us today. We've got a handful of PowerPoint slides just to walk you through. We did want to leave plenty of time for Q&A. We have Kristen, you can see the background on us here, and Christine, thank you for the introduction, and thank you for the opportunity to be with you here today. We have done a handful of these presentations and similar presentations over the past few weeks, and you know, I know Kristen would agree in that a lot of the most beneficial feedback is not just having us tell everyone about our experience and some of the things that we're seeing out in the marketplace. We are managing projects all over the country, but the feedback from our listeners and from the people that are participating in this. So what we're going to do is we'll break out the presentation in two parts. I'm going to handle the front end, and then we'll stop and do some Q&A, and then Kristen will handle the back end. So a little bit about our company real quick before I dive into the meat of the presentation. You saw the last slide. We've Tom Ralzer, who lives in Atlanta, has written a host of books, Return on Investment for Nonprofits, which was written 2007-ish, and then a most recent book called Asking Rights. And that I'll talk about that a little bit in the presentation, but for the most part, we really like to focus on not only just the emotional component of asking for money, but also the rational piece as well. As far as our firm, yes, we've had the luxury of working with the Lynchburg Regional Business Alliance. You can also see sort of in the top middle, Lynchburg Beacon of Hope. We also worked for them as well locally. They raised money for Promise programs to help pay for college, kids coming out of high school in Lynchburg to help pay for college. And beyond that, we work with nonprofits big and small all over the country. So right now we're working with the community college right outside Seattle, Washington, and have a project up for the state of Maine, down to Florida, and over to Texas. Anything from hospice to homelessness to YMCAs, and of course, chambers of commerce and economic development organizations as well. So today's agenda, I described a little bit. I'm going to handle the fundraising piece on the front end, talking about fundraising during a crisis. We'll talk about a little bit emotional versus the rational appeal, investors versus donors, engaging board leadership was something that's really come up a lot recently as sort of a stumbling block with some nonprofits. And then I'll stop, we'll do some Q&A, and then Kristen will handle the back end and discuss marketing, donor outreach, messaging, also another touch point on the board of director engagement, and then we'll have a second Q&A. So real quick, just a broad brush background before we dive into really fundraising during a crisis and some of the current issues that I think everyone is wanting to hear about and talk through. I did just want to give a little bit of background. Everyone, I think right now, considering all of the economic fallout and with all of the transition in the marketplace, you know, everyone is very emotional about things. And I think to an extent, a lot of people, when they look at fundraising, they think the traditional thought process behind raising money is that it's an emotional decision. And to an extent, even though, you know, the emotional part is, you see the picture of the heart here, that it's, you know, people want the warm glow, that it's a tug at the heartstrings, and that the sense of urgency appeal is sort of that part of the emotional component. But then there's the rational component as well. And the rational component, you know, does not ignore fundamental fundraising processes. It's an alternative to tug at the heartstrings. And it's really, for us, at the top end of the spectrum, for the larger solicitations, it tends to work a little bit better. But the end of the day, the real sweet spot in fundraising, we have found, is that you have a little bit of both. That you have all the tools in your tool belt, that when you're going out and asking for a commitment from somebody, that if there is an emotional component of that, then you can use that. But you also want that rational component too. And so you're meeting both needs, and that middle component is where you'll end up raising the most money. And so looking at it on a scale, again, on the left side, it's strictly the emotional component, the warm and fuzzy. And then as you start sliding over the scale here, you have, you know, outputs. So you might have specific statistics that you might use, like, hey, we saw so many people this month at our facility. Then you're looking over at actually making that more impactful by saying, okay, just because you saw so many people, what does that mean? Defining economic impact, that's something that's more of an outcome versus an output. And that's when you're looking at organizational impact, organizational value proposition, meaning what is the actual outcomes of the programs that your organization is facilitating. And then you can even, you know, at the very end of the spectrum, where you're really looking at bottom line, is getting real specific about the customized specific impact to a specific organization or a specific individual, a foundation. And that's kind of their super sweet spot. If you can really define specifically how someone will benefit from the work that your nonprofit performs, then you're going to be able to speak individually to that prospect, to that potential donor, and that's how ultimately you'll raise the most money. So we always use the term investors. Each nonprofit is very different, so we're not saying everyone needs to do it this way, but to an extent, I know that most nonprofits now are kind of changing their lexicon a little bit to not talk as much about donors and talk about investors. And really it's semantics, but as you can see on the slide here, you know, a typical donor is, you know, have you demonstrated the need for your services? An investor standpoint is, how will the funding of your organization improve the situation? Again, you're kind of really moving towards that. Rather than just looking at an output, you're looking at the outcome. What activities did you undertake to address the need? An investor looks at things and says, what results did you deliver, and how do they improve the lives of your primary customers? Again, if you can define how your organization is impacting the local community or your specific audience, then you'll be able to, you know, tell a potential funder what the impact will be with additional funding, how your organization can scale and obviously meet more needs of more individuals. And then the last one, from a donor standpoint, have we spread our available funding across those nonprofits addressing the issue? And an investor standpoint, what is the right amount of money for your organization to bring about real change? And then here, just a quote from Ben Miller at Donor Trends. If charities are not creating a pipeline of future funders and supporters, then their ability to accomplish their mission and provide services are put into real jeopardy. And that's very, very true. And I think true now more than ever. Excuse me one second. So to turn off my printer. So getting to the real crux of why we're here today is not just talking about traditional ways about raising money and how best to raise money in traditional times. It's really looking at today's day and age, and due to the coronavirus and due to the crisis at hand, how do you pivot? What do we do differently? How do we message differently? And it's really critical that you look at now what you've been doing traditionally and see how you can customize and revise what your messaging is to meet today's crisis. So it's important that you put in the hard work now to make sure your goals and outcomes fill the community needs of today, not your needs of yesterday. And that's really getting down to the bottom line of showing your nonprofit's impact and really relaying that sense of urgency. And that, the sense of urgency is extremely powerful. But again, you want to mirror that with the idea of what the outcomes of the initiatives that your specific nonprofit, what your needs are meeting in the community. And that sense of urgency, along with communicating that impact, is extremely powerful. And then the bottom line is too, don't be shy. Ask for what you need. So many times people make assumptions that somebody won't fund you, or that because of all of these things going on that they shouldn't even be asked. And I would just advise you, don't be shy. You will be amazed. I have seen time and time again in the past few weeks that people have another gear. There's another level within us as human beings that we never knew was possible. I have seen just such unbelievable positive stories over the past few weeks that just really makes your heart just grow. Next slide. So I have a handful of slides here and just some general advice, and then we'll open it up for some questions and answers, because I know a lot of you have specific things that you would like to ask. But just some general things when you're looking at revising your plan. Again, going back to the last slide, you can't do things just by using your old playbook. You obviously want to plan for today's environment. You want to lay out, just like any solid business plan, decisions and assumptions for each scenario. Nobody knows specifically when we're all going to get back to work. Nobody knows specifically how bad things are still going to be when we get to the other side of the curve. And so you just want to lay out all the different scenarios and then develop reasonable goals. So many times people develop their goals based on best case scenarios. And I'm probably one of the more conservative guys at the firm. Have different scenarios, but have reasonable goals. Understand that, you're not working in a normal environment, and it's really important to set goals that are achievable and reasonable, and they aren't some kind of pie in the sky. If all the planets line up, we're gonna hit these specific goals. And then obviously you want to revise the tactics with an online focus and short term, right? Like, here's what we're going to do over the next couple months. Then we'll revisit once we have a better idea of how the economy and how this is all going to shake out. You want to really ask the tough questions and right size your initiatives. It's important that you really adjust to the times and not spend money where it's unnecessary or where it's just not the reality of the situation. You need to make tough decisions and obviously be prepared to pivot as necessary. I mean, even within our firm, we've made some decisions, and then within a week we've decided, hey, you know what, that probably is not the best way to go right now. So just be very nimble and make sure that you're constantly looking at your plans and updating as necessary. Again, customization and being fluid is really critical. So if you're trying new things and you're revising your plan and something doesn't work to the way that you expected it to, don't cry about it. Just update the plan and make sure that you pivot and move on to a new direction. So engaging board leadership, this is something that's really, I've created a handful of slides now just specific to looking at how to get the board engagement. We've heard from more than one of our roundtables that we've hosted over the past few weeks that to some extent, board of directors are getting more disengaged. Some board members are disappearing. They're not stepping up. They're not helping. They're not helping fundraise. It's not all across the board by any means, but to an extent, it seems to us that it's a real area of focus right now, because where some nonprofits are really needing their board to step up in a really big way, that it's kind of the opposite, and they're struggling by getting the board engaged and having them. I guess everybody rowing in the same direction is very powerful, but it's difficult, right? Everybody's at home, everybody's on different schedules, and it's hard to get that camaraderie and to get everyone rowing in the same direction. So we've just come up with a handful of slides to really help with your nonprofits and helping to engage and get the most from your volunteers, your board of directors. So obviously proactive communication with everyone being at home and not all sitting around the table. It's really important that you send updates regularly. You don't sugarcoat the situation. Be as upfront and candid as possible about the current situation, and specifically, of course, to your nonprofit, whether that be the finances, staffing, morale, whatever it is. It's important that you just be upfront and honest. You want to do what you can to share personal stories to connect deeply with your board members. So take the time to listen, respond to each individual. And it's really about quality over quantity. You want to create meaningful dialogue and build that rapport and as much as you can during this time. Video updates to board members and volunteers are a nice touch. We've started to do that rather than just sending out a weekly update to all of our directors that are spread out all over the country. Our CEO is sending a video update. So it's something personal. That's a nice touch above and beyond just doing the video meetings. And then, reaching out and asking your board members to touch base with your core supporters. This is your board members' time to shine. So really reach out to them. I think raising expectations and letting them know that you need them now more than ever, that they will step up, that they will perform. Enlist and solicit feedback from your board, surveying board members for their candid input and feedback. You should be doing this anyway, but I think right now is the perfect time to get some feedback from them on what they think needs to be done, how they're doing personally, what they think the organization needs to be doing, and just an overall view of the organization. It's really critical to get some candid feedback, to get some constructive criticism, to find out what they think where the shortcomings are, so then you can respond and adapt accordingly. So you want to take their temperature, find out how they're feeling, and then and I'll also help engage your board members to take the temperature of your donors. You could create a competition or a friendly wager of some sort to, in reaching out to your donors, or maybe even raising X amount of money from your specific donors. You could also develop teams rather than it be an individual thing. That's another way that it could be fun to create some sort of competition. Some people aren't super comfortable in reaching out to others and asking for money, so creating teams sometimes kind of is an end around where people aren't going to feel comfortable. And then you could use online documents and graphs and things to track your progress real time. And it's always important to stay positive and share success stories. There's a lot of organizations out there that are doing amazing things, just like a lot of the people I know that are on this call. And it's really important to just constantly be talking about the good stuff, and not, you don't always want to just talk about the negative. And then I'm a huge believer of the law of inertia. This is really critical, and this gets back to sharing those positive stories about positive forward momentum. The last thing you want to do is get stuck in a deer in the headlights and that, oh no, we're not doing well. Nobody's going to be giving us money. We're not going to be able to open our doors. Do the best under the current circumstances, and it's important that you get some small steps to get that positive forward momentum, and then big things will happen. If you are stay positive and you continue to kind of knock out some of the things in your updated plan, you will get that positive momentum. And it's an amazing thing, that momentum, because as you get going forward, you tend to pick up steam and people get on the train, and you really start knocking some things out that you otherwise thought maybe in the beginning that you would not have. So again, getting back to where I talked about before about the revising your plan, you want to set short and long-term achievable goals, reasonable goals. Make sure that everyone has a role to play. Again, sharing the positive news and the feedback and success stories real time. Like something happens today, send out a note by the end of the day, and send out a personal note to your donors. Nobody gets those written personal notes anymore, and that's always something that kind of stands out to me. If I get a handwritten card from somebody, it really makes an impression on me, because you just don't get them very much anymore. Obviously, getting donations from your board members right now would be helpful. It's not completely necessary, but if they're going to be out asking for money, it's always important that if they've already made a commitment themselves. Matching and challenge commitments create leverage. Those are always the wonderful thing to have when you're fundraising. If you've got someone, I'm going to talk about a couple examples in a minute, but if you do have someone that has made a commitment and has offered to match it, that's huge, because that creates leverage, which is king in fundraising. You obviously want to communicate early pledges to relay a positive message, and obviously if you do have some early commitments from folks, that it will help set the bar high for others to follow. And all donations matter regardless of size right now, so it's not always just the really big ones. I think it's really critical to recognize all of those that commit. Even if it's an in-kind commitment, if they're donating goods or services, then they need to be recognized just as much as anyone that's given cash. And then obviously you want to give kudos and recognize your board and volunteer donations regularly, and then also staff members. I think I just have like another couple of slides, and then we'll open it up for Q&A, and then we'll kick it over to Kristen. So big question is, should you be fundraising now? And with a resounding yes, absolutely. The messaging should be different. Kristen's going to talk about that, but there's no reason why you should not be fundraising now, and why you can't be raising money now. Obviously, it has to be done differently. Maybe you won't be raising as much, but depending on what your goods and services are that you're offering, there's some nonprofits now that have just exploded with the amount of money that they're raising, and we'll talk a little bit about that as well. But it's important that you show the outcomes that are relevant today. You want to cultivate investors and establish strong connections and leaders. You can cancel events, but again, don't be shy about asking for money. If you do cancel an event, it's okay to ask if you can still keep the money, or if there was a sponsorship that was tied to an event. Maybe you could have a virtual event and they could sponsor that, where you're not having to return money that might be otherwise foregone due to the canceled event. If you are in the midst of a fundraising campaign, or you're planning a campaign, stay the course. It likely will be maybe reduced in the amount that your goal might be, and maybe the timeline might be a little bit longer, but we're advising our clients to stay the course in that regard. Couple quick examples. One of the things that we're recently involved in, we've actually donated our company time and resources to help locally. We have our CEO and two of our principals live in the Triangle area in Raleigh. And the city of Raleigh recently decided to come up with $1 million grant program to help small businesses in the city. And we have taken it upon ourselves to help them raise a matching $1 million from the local private sector, from local companies. And so that's something that's happening real time that will help a whole host of nonprofits. There was $10 million pledged also in North Carolina by State Employee Credit Union. And that's going to help tons of nonprofits all over the state, specifically to dealing with the COVID-19 the coronavirus crisis, disaster relief efforts. We also had a $50,000 pledge from a campaign that we were managing that was in the first week of the crisis. Just some positive stories and relaying the fact that people are still raising money and we are still moving forward. We had $1 million commitment to a YMCA up in Catawba County in North Carolina, and that's where Hickory is. And I know there's a YMCA I've talked with there in Lynchburg, and this is something that's happened literally 2 weeks ago. So people are, it's interesting, I think, that this whole crisis has had people really look inside, and there's some introspect going on about how can I make an impact, how are my goals changed or different than due to all this crisis. And it's we've had some people coming out of the woodwork that have never even been asked for money that have actually said, how can I help? So that's why it's really critical actually just to reach out to people right now, take their temperature, not even ask for money, just find out how your major stakeholders are doing. You'd be amazed at how quickly that conversation then turns into, what can I do for you? So real quick, I think this is the last slide, and then we'll take some questions. Going virtually with your events, I talked about that a little bit. There's a Unbanquet, which is a Zoom gathering hosted by sponsors for each table that you would normally have in a normal event. Online auctions have done really well. And this is an area where people can sit at home and bid on things and look at things real time. And they get, right now, because of everyone's being at home, there's a lot more attention and a wider audience than ever before. And I'd mentioned this before, but don't make assumptions about your stakeholders and potential donors. If you think that they might not give, or they don't have the capacity, they don't have the money, times are tight, just don't be afraid to ask. You'd be amazed at the outpouring of support that you would receive. And I think then we will pause for Q&A.
And
yes.
we have a lot, Andy. So I'm gonna do a couple that are relevant to the content you're talking about now. There are a couple in here about communication, so we'll get to those after Kristen, because I know she's going to talk about communication. But
okay.
Andy, you mentioned in the beginning about some scenarios. That it's time to start setting some short-term and some different scenarios. The question was, where might there be some guidance on how to set scenarios? Do you have some go-to sources you use for scenario planning and something like this?
No specific sources that I can think of. I can, we can definitely, as a follow-up to this, I know we're going to share the presentation, and we have some links of resources that we'll be sharing as well. And I can include some resources in the follow-up for sure.
That'd be great. Okay, so we'll make sure you guys get some samples of scenarios. Okay, you talked about events, you talked about virtual and auctions. Here's a question. 80% of our fundraising efforts are from a huge event that we aren't sure is going to happen. How would you sell sponsorships or fundraise for something that might not happen? You already mentioned just ask to keep the money, but what if you are in the process of now asking for money?
Well, then this is another one of those areas. I think that you have multiple scenarios. You have a scenario that, hey, if the event happens, here's how it's going to look, and then your plan B is a virtual scenario, and what would that look like? If the event can't happen in person, then think about how you can maximize the donor recognition, how you can maximize, are you auctioning things? Are you what is the other ways that you're getting money? Obviously, you won't have certain expenses, but I wouldn't necessarily, obviously one option is you cancel the event. On the other end of the spectrum, the event goes on as planned. But then, this is the whole part of the scenario planning. Is there a middle ground where you might be able to still have an online or some sort of virtual event where you're not giving up, you're not canceling the event and just kind of refunding money or saying, hey, do you mind if we keep it? But it's a middle ground. And that is where you can, have it virtually, and you can still recognize investors and stakeholders and still speak and engage and inform and do all the things that you normally would, just not in person.
And you jump in. Oh, sorry.
Oh, you mentioned, board engagement. That's a great opportunity to have your board sit around on a Zoom and talk about look, we can't do this in person. Great minds, let's innovate. Let's think about how can we imagine this to look differently.
Right.
So that's
And
another way to engage your board.
yeah, and ask your major donors. I mean, this is the beauty of you don't have to sit around and wonder, oh, well, what would they think? Ask them.
Ask them.
They might come up with the most amazing ideas and blow your mind. But that's important to ask.
Well, and that's where I was going to jump in and say exactly what you said, Christine, is just get creative and get ideas from other sources to help you get creative. That Unbanquet that Andy mentioned was a nonprofit near us that actually wasn't near us. It was on one of our round tables, but it was on the West Coast. And that idea was given to them by one of their major sponsors for their banquet that was, scheduled for April 1st. And the sponsor's idea was, why don't we take all of our tables and make them into our own Zoom calls? They didn't ask for any of their sponsorship money back. They turned each table into their own little Zoom happy hour and talked about what the nonprofit was doing, what their plans were for the future, and could you donate? And they ended up raising more money than they had ever raised before at the event.
Love it.
So, yeah.
All right, couple more I know we got to move on, but a couple more questions related to fundraising. Are there strategies different at this time for business investors versus individual?
Oof, wow, that's a tough one. It honestly depends. I mean, I'm struggling to answer that one because it really depends on the nonprofit. It depends on how much you're asking. It depends on what types of things you're raising money for. So there's no blanket response, but I would say that yes, I mean, the ask should be different. It should be customized to the audience that you're going to. And then, don't be afraid to come up with a specific amount you might want to ask. We do that with businesses. With individuals, sometimes they take that the wrong way, and they enjoy more of it being open-ended. So with businesses, though, a lot of times we'll go in and ask, we would like you to consider X. Like right now, we're raising $1 million to help match the $1 million that the city of Raleigh has donated. And we'll be going to Wells Fargo saying, we would like you to consider a $50,000 commitment towards this $1 million that we're trying to raise. It gives them a benchmark and it gives them a place that they can come back a little bit, but it also gives you a starting point. And don't be too shy to ask for too much. Obviously, you don't want to blow them out of the water, but that's something that that you might do is just see how that goes, and leaving it open-ended for individuals, but ask for a specific amount for businesses.
Yeah. All right, 2 more questions related to fundraising, and then there's a couple on communications, but I'm going to wait till Kristen goes. So,
okay.
What are your thoughts on Giving Tuesday for May 5th? Do you suggest taking advantage of this opportunity?
Yes, I mean, there's no reason why not.
Just
again,
message it correctly.
Absolutely. There's only upside.
Yep. Okay. Okay. Final question on fundraising, and then we'll get on to Kristen's part of the presentation. We've lost this question comes, we've lost a big chunk of funding from donors that have had to reroute funds due to COVID-related aspects. We've decided to start concentrating on finding small monthly donors to try to put a dent in the loss. So it's a whole different strategy. What are some of the best tactics to get this started off the ground?
Well, I would start with some of your core funders and some of your grassroots folks to start there, and then get enlist their support and start reaching out that way. This is what we talked about before about pivoting and being fluid and customizing. But I would definitely start with your strongest supporters and your staunch supporters, and use them to really use their connections and their passion for your organization and what you do to reach out that way. I mean, social media is a powerful thing. Creating online fundraising is really powerful as well. But I would definitely use your current supporters to leverage their passion for the organization and their contacts, and kind of continue to branch out that way rather than just going out blind.
That's good. Okay, we've got a couple of communications, but again, I'm going to wait on them because Kristen, you're probably going to cover these. So without
All right.
further ado, Kristen, marketing and communications expert extraordinaire. Take it away.
Sure. So I'm going to talk a little bit about donor outreach, which hopefully you all are already doing, and maybe this can just help you focus it and give you some ideas you hadn't thought of. And a lot of what I'll be doing, Christine and Andy both mentioned, we've probably run 7 in the past 3 weeks roundtables. We serve quite a few different niches at Convergent. We serve kind of a general nonprofit niche, but we do a lot of business with YMCAs. We do a lot of business with the economic development industry, the chambers of commerce, fundraising. So we've run some roundtables specific, and I'm sorry, community colleges is another one of our big niches. So we've run some specific roundtables for those groups of people so that they could just share, vent. I mean, the first one, we really got right on it and did it the first week, because what we were hearing from our clients was, what are your other clients doing? Any ideas, anything you can share? And so we decided to just kind of bring these people together, not just our clients, but prospects, friends, anybody we ever tested on social media, everything. So a lot of what I'll share with you is just interesting things I thought that were shared on those calls. They really became, we have no presentation when we go into them. We do it Brady Bunch style, where everybody's just kind of together, talking, looking at each other's videos and asking each other questions. And we jump in when we have answers, but otherwise it's just, what are you guys doing? What's working? What's not working? So the first thing that I would share is obviously to listen. So, and listen to your community, not just your peers, but what is working or what is happening in your community. So in the community college, on those roundtables, we've heard people say, oh, this has been an incredible time to fundraise. I can't believe the response I'm getting when I do these asks. And, you know, I was nervous to go out there and do this, to put this message out there, and just the outpouring of support we've received has been amazing. But then just 2 counties over, we hear an executive director say, there is no way that I can go out and do this right now. We are still a community in crisis. We're still waiting. You know, we have parents worried, not knowing what's going on with the school board. We have, you know, so you really have to listen to your specific community. And I know most of you are from the same community, but the community of your specific nonprofit niche, I would say too. And then act on what you hear and kind of go with your gut on that one. The biggest message, and I'm sure the one you all are all hearing, is communicate and communicate and communicate. So at least as often as you did before is our suggestion, and really what we've been hearing from everyone we have talked to. More is better. People want to hear from you. Don't go dark. And if you have been dark, stop now. A lot of what Andy said is true about video being great, but a lot of our executive directors and development directors are just jumping on the phone and handwriting letters. So really, those are the personal touch of jumping on the phone. I love the next bullet is write, call, repeat. That's the strategy of, we did a podcast with 2 CEOs from YMCAs, and it was really interesting because one was from the North Boston area. Her name was Kathleen Walsh. And the other one, Steve Tamero, was from the state of Washington, the west side of Washington. But so very different viewpoints. Steve had been he had been going through this since February. Obviously, they were on the front end of everything. And Kathleen, if Steve had been a CEO for 10 years, 40 years in YMCA leadership, Kathleen is 1 year as a CEO. So they provided a really different perspectives, but both of them, their strategy for communication was literally write, call, repeat. So they were emailing, they were using some direct mail, which is hard, I know, because you've got to find printers that are open and there's some logistical challenges there. But Kathleen showed us she had a stack this big of just cards to handwrite, like Andy was saying. So they were writing, then they were calling, and they had started with their senior population, gone through their database and specifically calling them first to say, how are you doing? How are you feeling? And actually, that's an important note. So what Andy said is definitely our philosophy, that it doesn't hurt to ask. Don't be shy about asking, but definitely lead with a message of more empathy and concern. How are you feeling? Is there anything you need? Is there anything our nonprofit can do for you? And they really, the Ys had started with that senior population and just kind of worked on from there. We actually had a community college tell us that they had 50 volunteers, staff members, and I think some alumni were in there too. And they called all 14,000 students in their first week just to say, how are you doing? We're here for you. And then the get personal aspect to kind of reiterate what Andy was saying is really important too. I actually just got, we belong to a lot of nonprofit groups around the nation, and I got a email this morning that was pretty unbelievable from the executive director of the Montana Nonprofit Association. And it shared how her mother, she just lost her mother to COVID-19. And she shared the story of it. And it really was a powerful story. I mean, I think things like that are what people want to hear too. And then the last thing is be transparent with information. Somebody had mentioned, I scrolled through the chats real quick, Christine, and somebody had mentioned, should we tell people if we got the PPP Act, if we were approved for the loan? And absolutely. I mean, I think what the WISE had said on those calls with the community colleges, what we're hearing about is whatever questions are asked that they can answer, they do answer them. But the other big thing with that bullet is don't be afraid to say, we don't know. We're still working on it. We don't have that information yet. That's okay. People just want to know that you're giving them all the information that you have. Messaging, obviously, rework all of your collateral. It's got to reflect what's going on right now. Somebody was saying, yeah, we just basically threw out all of our acknowledgement letters and started fresh. You may just be able to put in a paragraph at the beginning or a paragraph at the end, reflecting what's going on right now, but definitely every message you send out needs to be timely and say something about what's going on right now. And then versioning your outreach, specific messages, obviously for staff and constituents, but also for current donors versus new donors and lapsed donors. This is another interesting thing we're hearing is that there are a lot of, like Andy was saying, actually, people are re-examining who they're contributing to and how much they're contributing, and in a positive way for many nonprofits. So making sure to recognize that anybody new who starts to support your organization now needs a special message and can be brought into the fold as a long-term supporter if they are coming on board now. And then it's a great time to reach out to your lapsed donors, but again, with a special message. In your messaging, most donors are concerned with immediate and operational needs. So the long-term strategy and, reinforcing your mission isn't bad, but reinforcing what the mission is doing right now, and some of your operational needs is our best advice there. And then these last two slides are just about thinking outside the box, like we were talking about earlier. So the city mission, a large homeless shelter in Cleveland, Ohio, is a nonprofit we've been running a campaign for. And we got a chance to do a podcast with the executive director, Rich Trickle. And he was saying that their best tool right now is social media. So not only is it super timely, you can immediately tell people when you have good news, when you have, a struggle, when you have an immediate need. But it also is very, very highly trafficked right now. And your website is not a bad idea too. If you can, we've been updating our cover page of our website weekly, which is not something we ever did before. We have chambers of commerce who have been using their websites in really neat ways. That's the good news bullet I have there, is just obviously everybody is really hungry for news right now, but good news is something that the nonprofit industry has a unique position to share. So we have some chambers of commerce that have put out restaurant opening and closing hours, and are they delivery or curbside pickup and that kind of thing, things that chambers of commerce are typically not sharing. So they've built websites around that. We also had a chamber of commerce that had built a good news site because they were getting some news about businesses in town 3D printing shields. Two of those were banks that just happened to have a 3D printer, and they just thought that was so unique. They, put it on the cover page of their website. And then just something fun that a community college was doing. If you don't have good news, create your own. So they just wanted to kind of keep people engaged and put something fun out there, and so started doing Teal Tuesdays. Their school color is teal. So then their social media has been flooded with pictures of people on Zoom calls, kids on their school Zoom calls, wearing their teal, wearing their college colors. So anything you can do to kind of foster that sort of fun and take people's mind off of the negative of what's going on. And then mobilizing your volunteers. So the YMCA of the Twin Tiers is doing a shepherding program. And that's part of that call them all and write them all type of advice. And then this was a kind of a unique thing we've heard in a lot of our different calls is who can you partner with? And think outside the box on this one too. So the YMCA's and the food banks, you guys have probably heard a lot about. They're using their parking lots as food bank distribution. The YMCA of Catawba Valley got with the food bank and is doing a grab and go out of their one of their aerobics rooms where kids under 18 can grab and go breakfast. But this one was definitely a little more unique. I think some of one of our colleges that we talked to had paired with an HR professional group in their community, and they were doing these weekly podcasts. And it wasn't just, it was some logistics for sure, how to rework your resume if you're out of work now, what should you do, what steps should you take, but also the mental health aspect. So, Zoom calling all day, what is this doing to us? The Zoom fatigue, that kind of thing. So that was kind of a unique way for the college to continue communicating with its community. So if there's anything like that you all can do, any partnerships that you can forge, now is the time. The last thing I had were these resources. So these are just a few things, and we're going to email out this presentation so you guys can just click on these yourselves. But these were a few things that were shared with us that were particularly well received by the people that shared them and the people we shared them with. So Bloomerang has some success stories with a lot of what we've been hearing is not just tell me what to do, but do you have any specifics? And I know that's what would be particularly helpful probably to a lot of you. So Bloomerang has specific success stories of donor outreach with the exact examples of the emails at that link. The QZM.com is a museum nonprofit association, and they have a lot of really creative ideas of how they're keeping their museums running and active in their communities. The SECF is a Southeast Community Foundation, and they have some listservs for CEOs and executive directors. And again, that just fosters that information sharing. Blue Avocado, I thought, had a kind of unique checklist for communication that might be helpful to you guys. And then I put our website in there. We have some podcasts, some blogs that, as I said, we've just tried to bring together as many professionals as we can in the nonprofit industry and ask them what they're doing and what they're planning to do and how it's working.
Okay, so let's see if I can do this the right way. We're gonna stop the screen sharing and let's get back to seeing everybody's smiling face. So we're going to open it up to questions. You're welcome to put them in the chat, or you can take yourself off mute and actually lend your voice. So who's got some additional questions that weren't covered with Andy and Kristen? Nobody? Going once? Y'all are afraid to talk. Someone's going to be the first one.
Hey, this is Megan.
Hello.
I'll ask a question. Andy, what do you think are the key characteristics of a good fundraiser? The 3 top characteristics of a good fundraiser.
Great question.
That's a great question. I would say, this hasn't changed from the beginning of time for me, is integrity. That's number 1, and it's not even close. I think without integrity, you're going to struggle.
Yeah.
So just being honest, candid, and upfront. Obviously, I think being a people person, and then just love what you do. That's one of our cores in our company. We actually have core values that we hire and yes, fire. Sometimes you're just not in the right seat. But loving what you do and is really important. I mean, it really comes across to people that you have compassion, that you love what you do, that you have integrity, and if you have all of those, the rest will fall into place, really.
Great. Thank you. Good to see you.
This question came up on the chat, guys. Just asking for your opinion. What would be the route for those planning major fundraising events later in the year? Much planning has paused at this time.
Yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, I think, we just, it's hard to say, to be honest, because plans are changing so often right now. I think a few weeks ago, everyone was hoping that by June, all the conferences will be back up and running and all the sports, and we'll get back in the saddle. And it is not looking like June is going to be the time that we'll be back at it. And now, of course, everyone's talking about maybe events and sporting events even in the fall that are either sporting events that are going to be held without fans, or conferences that are going to be, maybe that were rescheduled to August that are now looking dicey. So again, I think it just really gets back to having multiple scenarios in your plan and planning for the best and then also for the worst, and having a fallback option. But at the end of the day, I think it's important that you put on a positive face and go out and assume the best and plan for the worst.
Yeah,
Oh, go ahead.
Go ahead, Kristen.
Go ahead, Kristen.
I was going to say that podcast I mentioned with Kathleen and Steve, the CEOs of the YMCAs from two separate parts of the country. The other thing that they were both doing consistently is meeting with their boards weekly, in Kathleen's case, and I think monthly in Steve's case, but providing their boards with a 30, 60, 120 day scenario. And they said, Kathleen was saying weekly, hers is changing. So you really, if you just kind of continue to do that, to put a time frame together and then just tweak it as we go here.
Good. There's an acronym, and Andy, you and Kristen might have heard of this. It is What Must You Do, MUST, to help delineate what you might be able to make money on, or what is going to be a value proposition. So the M stands for what's the massive problem. The U stands for what's your unique solution. The S stands for, is there a starving market for that solution? And the T is the timing right?
Right.
And I thought that was such a good kind of way to identify, what goes on your scenarios? What do you plan? And is it are people going to buy it? And if you follow that MUST acronym, you might have more of a success. I'm sure you all have heard of that.
That's excellent.
Other questions? Nothing else in the chat? Anybody else want to ask something and brave enough to use your voice?
Okay. I'd like to ask. Okay. If your organization was preparing to introduce a new annual investment opportunity for corporate or business donors for the fiscal year, what would be your recommendation? Should we just scratch it for now, scrap it, and plan on introducing it at a later time? Should we try to revise it and do something different? It was kind of a huge undertaking that we were going to be introducing actually last month and this month going into the new fiscal year.
So my suggestion would be, no, you don't scrap it, but you might revise it. But this is an opportunity, I think, that you, behind the scenes, you go out to some of your key supporters, your staunchest allies, your donors, your closest friends and family, and have some conversations with them. But prior to just rolling it out to everybody all at once, but there's no reason that you need to completely scrap it. You might need to tone it down a little bit, remessage it or whatnot. Maybe revise your goals a little bit, but I wouldn't scrap it. But again, it's an easy thing to do, to just go out and ask for somebody's opinion. Hey, what do you think? What do you think we should do in this situation? And have that conversation with the closest, I don't know, half a dozen donors and people that are close to you in the organization, and get their feedback, and then figure out how to attack it.
That's good. Speaking of survey, I have just launched the poll to find out if this was helpful for you guys today. So if you all would mind giving us your feedback, and we do
Thanks
have
for your time.
Wait, don't leave yet. I got another question. Just giving people a chance to fill out that poll. Are there any ROI rubrics that you recommend reviewing?
Kristen, I'll let you take a question for a change.
Well, honestly, I didn't want to give a totally blatant Convergent plug, but Tom's books are where I have probably learned most of what I know about ROI applying to fundraising and nonprofits. So I would say he specifically has a book called ROI for Fundraising. So that would be probably my best suggestion. Andy, is there anything you can think of?
Yeah, I can, this can be something we can send out in the resources as well. But it is important to be able to look at your programs and be able to put some meat on the bone and really be able to communicate the value of what it is that you're doing prior to asking for money. Because if you can do that, if you can figure out how to communicate the impact of the programs of your nonprofit as you're asking for money, and then communicate the fact that with additional resources, we're going to be able to do X or Y, then you'll be able to raise more money. And obviously it will be more impactful for the donor if they know that their money is what kind of impact that it will have. So there's nothing I can think of off the top of my head beyond what Kristen's talked about, but we can definitely do some due diligence and send out an additional resource when we do our follow-up. That's
great. That's great. Any other questions, either audio or in the chat? Now is your chance before we say goodbye to our friends at Convergent. I don't hear any. Well, Andy and Kristen, thank you.
Thank you.
You guys are a wonderful partner for our community, our region, our organization, and we just appreciate you sharing your knowledge with us. And I'm sure we'll be following up and talking to you again. For those that are on the call, we will follow up. Jamie will follow up and send you all a copy of the PowerPoint. We hope to have this up on YouTube in the next day or so you can share it maybe even with your boards. If you need some help persuading and you want an extra voice to lend to what you're trying to do. And I would also say when Jamie sends you that PowerPoint, if there are other topics that you think would be helpful as you navigate this, we are working on some recovery strategies. What does recovery look like for our different sectors? So we'll be putting that out in the next couple weeks. So stay tuned for that. But please do let us know what other topics would be helpful for you. And I'll finish with one quote that I now keep on my bulletin board, which I think might help you all. It says, in moments of uncertainty, imagination is power. And we don't know how long this is going to be. So every day is a new chance to innovate and to use your imagination and to reach out to those amazing stakeholders you have and those that you have on your inner circle to help you be creative. So with that, stay strong, chin up, and we'll talk to you soon. Thank you all.
Thanks so much. Thanks for having us.
Thank you.